How many times have you been told or given the impression that your underactive glutes are the reason why you have back pain, hip pain, knee pain, or even just bad posture in general? Underactive glutes are one of the biggest myths and lies that persist within the fitness and rehab industry. I'm going to dispel why you don't probably have underactive glutes in the way that you think you do and what you can actually do to get your glutes to work better. Now, underactive glutes have been given a wide variety of different labels over the last few decades, whether that's gluteal amnesia, dead butt syndrome, sway back posture, all sorts of different things have been described as the same underlying problem, which is that someone's glutes aren't active enough and that's causing them to have issues in their low back or knees or other places because the glutes are an important muscle for creating what we call hip extension. Hip extension is the action of you standing up straight and your hips coming underneath you. Now, don't get me wrong, glutes are a very important muscle for posture and movement, but if your glutes didn't work, you wouldn't be able to stand up from a chair, and you would probably fall flat on your face. So it's not that your glutes aren't working, but maybe it's more so along the lines of within certain contexts of movement and posture, they're not as integrated within those things as they should be. Let me give you an example of what I mean. There's two different reasons a muscle can be underactive in a given context. First, it's important to appreciate that muscles need some degree of resting slack in them so they can close space off. Now, most people think and have been given the impression that a muscle is too weak because it is in too much of an elongated position. Now, the glutes create closing off of the backside of the pelvis because they help stand us up. So if the glutes are in too elongated of a position, they're not going to be able to effectively close this space off and extend our hip. Now, that is one way that could be the case. The other way is that the muscle is already too short. So how can a muscle contract if it's already starting in a relatively contracted position? This is not going to give us the leverage that we need to effectively close off the space, because every muscle for an optimal contraction needs to come from a relatively elongated position. Now, there's two different postures this can take place in. Let's start with the first example where your glutes are in too much of an elongated position and they can't properly fully extend your hips. These people are usually stuck in a degree of anterior pelvic tilt where their pelvis looks like it's on a down slope. They have a pronounced low back arch and they look something like this over here. Now, what's really cool is that people that are stuck in this position with underactive and long glutes will also present with certain objective range of motion deficits within assessments found in my biomechanics course. Now, early bird signups are open for my completely new and remastered, upgraded Biomechanics Course 2.0. In this new version of the course, you're going to learn to do what we're doing in this video, but at a very high level. You'll learn how to assess someone's posture and be able to cross-reference that and be able to understand their posture in the context of their objective range of motion and also dynamic assessments. I'm super excited for the release of this course. Early bird pricing is only going to be available for a couple more days, so check it out down below in the description. These people also tend to have lower ribs that are poked up and flared out because that back arch is so pronounced, and these people oftentimes can't get their glutes to fully extend their hips. Now, in that context, we do need to improve the act of hip extension, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But that doesn't mean we can do a bunch of banded clamshells and banded glute activation exercises to better improve our glutes' ability to contract and create hip extension. That's not how it works, because this is what I was referring to earlier in the video. We need specific contexts for creating movement in certain biomechanical positions. When I take a step forward with one leg and I'm beginning to load my body weight onto this side, my leg is going to start to need to come underneath me. This is the point at which my glutes are really working to create that hip extension. So at this point, my hip is relatively extended because my leg is underneath me, my thigh right here. And then my leg will continue to extend as I go into this position right here. But the glutes were mostly working to create that hip extension from here to here. So we got to understand the context of the body when we're doing this thing. This occurs when my whole foot is flat on the ground. I have my knee over my toe, and I have my glute beginning to work to pull my leg back. So what are the important points of contact in my feet that I need to cue this hip extension? That's the question we should ask. Those important contact points when the knee is going over the toe is the inner heel right here, and also the base of the big toe or the first metatarsal head right here. These are the points of contact we need to train alongside hip extension and glute activation, so that way it's better integrated within our movement. Here's an easy way you can start to do that. So for this, you want to get your feet on the wall like this to where your shin is relatively parallel with the floor. And you want to have a little bit more than a 90-degree bend at your hips and also your knees. So if this was 90-90-ish, you'd be a little bit further away than that. You can play around with getting closer or further away depending on what works for you, but right about here is what we're looking for to start. So just make sure your toes are straight ahead up at the ceiling, and make sure that your chin is also up at the ceiling. Now what we're gonna do is we're just going to pull one leg off of the wall. We can do both legs, but we'll start with one. Let's say I'm gonna do my left first. So I'll pull my right leg back just a little bit, and I'll hug the underside of my knee just like this. And I'll make sure that I have no pinch in my hip on my right side. If I do, I went back too far, and you can just play around with what's comfortable for you. So right about here, my right hip feels nice and comfortable. Now on the wall on the left, what I'm going to feel is the inner heel and the base of the big toe without losing the outside foot. It's just that's where my bias is with my foot pressure on that wall right there. So I should be able to push a little bit into the wall with those contacts of my foot and immediately feel some glute activation without lifting anything off of the ground quite yet. So just play around with that a little bit and see if you can get that. Once you get it, great. Okay, now inhale through your nose, maintaining that position. And as you gently but fully exhale, lift yourself off of the ground just maybe 2 inches at a time. And you're gonna feel your glutes start to work, maybe a little bit of upper hamstring as well, but the key is that you want to roll your pelvis off of the ground. It's like you're a piece of Velcro lifting one vertebrae at a time off. You don't wanna flare your rib cage and arch your back. It's like your pelvis is tilting underneath you, a posterior pelvic tilt, if you will. And then you're gonna inhale, maintaining that 2 inches off of the ground. Exhale, go up 2 more inches and hold, really feeling those foot pressures into the wall of the inner heel and base of the big toe without losing the outside foot. And you're gonna keep doing this one breath at a time until you get up into your highest position where you can't go any higher. And if you were to go any higher, you would start to arch your back, or you would lose your glute activation. So don't go up too high, stop at your relative in range, go back down, and then do it again. Now the other issue is that people can have glutes that are too tight, and they have glutes that are unable to fully elongate to then move into a relatively contracted position. These people typically have more of what you see as like a sway back posture or flat back posture. They will look something like this, and they will have what appears to be their pelvis dumped underneath them and out in front of them. They typically have a lot of forward head posture and no appearance of glute development. They have very little glutes because those glutes are so tight and locking the back of that pelvis shut that they can't actually activate them properly. So the goal for these people would be to actually create more space on the back side of the pelvis. Creating more space meaning opening up this back here. This is the act of internal rotation of the hips. When we have this bone tip like this, the sacrum bone, and these sit bones spread out from each other. And we can do that in positions where we're pushing our hips back in space because that creates that elongation. Let me show you a really good exercise that will help us improve that.
This is the wall walk down hinge exercise. What we're gonna do first is optimize our setup. So we wanna get far enough away from the wall to where if we were to lock out our arms, we can scoot a little bit closer there, Trevor, we would have a pretty straight line, we'd be pretty tall right there. So you wanna get to this point, but then back up with your feet about 6 inches or so. You wanna keep your feet straight ahead and hip width apart, just like Trevor is right here. Okay, now Trevor, I want you to grab that foam roller and put it up deep within your groin, basically as far up as it can comfortably go. Now, Trevor's gonna make sure that he has his hands flat at shoulder height, and they're also shoulder width apart. he's going to make sure his gaze always remains in between his palms and his hands at all times. Now, we need to make sure that we're feeling the right foot contacts the entire time throughout this hinge. So what we want to feel is the inside portion of the heel, the base of the big toe where the ball of the foot is, and also the outside base of the little toe where the ball of the foot is. So right here, and right there on both feet evenly. To initiate this exercise, Trevor's going to bend his knees a little bit, just slightly. Okay, now not losing those points of contact within his feet. He's going to move into a hinge. So his butt is going to move back and he's going to slowly walk his hands down that wall, moving into what we call a hinge where the chest is getting more parallel to the floor. Now he's going to reach a point where he starts to feel a stretch in his glute muscles, in the backside of his hips right here. Maybe a little bit of his hamstrings, but it should be mostly back here. Notice how Trevor has a little bit of an arch right here. He's keeping his chest up. That's okay as long as he's feeling the stretch in his glutes and his gaze stays in between his hands. Okay, so Trevor should feel a little stretch in his glutes and he should stay heavy over those points of contact within his feet, particularly the inner heel and the base of the big toe. Once he is hanging out here, he's going to give that foam roller a little squeeze. That can be anywhere from a 3 to even an 8 out of 10. But he needs to squeeze that only to the point where he feels that stretch in the backside of his hips still. He's going to feel a little bit of inner thighs engage, but he needs to make sure that his neck isn't engaging. He's not shrugging. He should be able to just isolate that squeeze and still feel that stretch back there. If you can, that's great. You're going to hang out and breathe here for about 5 to 8 slow breath cycles. Over time, as you get better at this, you can start to go a little bit deeper into that hinge. Just make sure that, again, you're getting that isolated stretch at your glutes and your eyes are staying looking in between your hands. So right there now, Trevor might feel a little bit more of a stretch, but only go deeper if you can only get the stretch in your glutes. If you're feeling it in your low back, you are for sure going too deep and you need to make some adjustments. The biggest issue we're going to see in this exercise is people feel it too much in their low back and not enough in their glutes. If that's the case, one of two things is likely here. Either you're too arched and extended through your low back and your ribs are flaring and you need to work on keeping your rib cage down just a little bit more. So the way you can do that is just get a nice gentle exhale. Feel your rib cage come down but keep your chest up. That can help take stress off of your low back. The other thing is people are too flexed and they're too rounded like this, and they need to actually keep their chest up more and get their shoulders not shrugging as much. So you can play around and see what works for you, but you should not feel anything really in your low back. You should feel it pretty much exclusively right here, and that's how you know you're doing it right. So many people are gonna be tempted to go too deep into their hips. Just chill on that and make sure that you're just going as deep as you can to feel that stretch. Another thing you could potentially do is bend your knees just ever so slightly more. Sometimes this can make a big difference, and that can get it in your glutes and not your low back. If you're feeling it in your low back a lot and you can't seem to shut it off, or you just want an easier way to do this, you could do this in a tall kneeling position. So your knees are directly underneath your hips and that foam roller is, again, really high up in those thighs right there. And everything is still hip width apart, shoulder width apart here. Now what Trevor's going to do is just the same exact thing. He's going to slowly walk his hands down that wall, trying to get his chest more parallel to the floor. And at some point he's going to start to feel a stretch back there. And you can just hang out and breathe there. Give that roller a little squeeze after you've established that stretch back there and no tension in your low back.
For optimal results, I'd recommend doing these exercises for about 2 to 3 sets of about 5 to 8 slow breath cycles, both in the morning and at night. I will also link alternatives down below in the description if you found these to be a little bit too challenging. I think most people will be able to do these quite well, but if you're looking for other ways you can open up space in the back of the hips or better activate your glutes in the context of that hip extension, I'm going to link those in the description and the caption down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.